Blood of the Cherry Blossom. A short story by PJ Leonard. It had been a long time since Yushi had enjoyed a hanami. The night still clung to a wintry chill, but he'd bought a thick jacket, and the beer numbed his senses anyway. He pushed his drinks and snacks aside and lay back on his tarp. He looked up into the thick blanket of pink cherry blossoms, the black night peeking through the gaps. If only his fiancée could be here as well. Shame about her twisted leg. Nobody else at work wanted to join him either. "I don't do hanami at night, too cold. I don't really drink anymore. I need to get home early tonight, I'm behind on sleep." And so on. Yushi had always known his co-workers were boring and health-obsessed. He'd never realized that they were this boring, though. Still, it didn't stop him from coming out and sitting under the cherry blossoms alone. He wouldn't go another year without them. Something soft and small flew across his face and caught in his eye. He blinked it away and spluttered as he felt another land on his lips. He sat up and peeled whatever it was from his face. A petal of cherry blossom, as soft as silk. More petals raced past his folded legs. He turned and watched them race towards the foot of the tree. He looked up again. The branches swayed gently. No wind. Yet the petals fluttered down in the same direction, all heading for the same spot where the trunk met the soil. Standing up and staggering, Yushi stepped over his empty beer cans and approached the foot of the tree. It was dark, dark enough to hide the pink petals that must have been piling up there. But as he came close, he saw that the black patch was not darkness, but a hole, an arch leading into the tree. The petals raced into it as though the hole were sucking them in. It looked big, big enough to squeeze through. Yushi looked around the park, silent, alone. He rubbed his chin. One hand leaning on the tree for support, he lowered himself to kneel next to the hole. He took out his smartphone and shone the light inside. Nothing. The hole seemed endless, swallowing the cherry blossom. Yushi pocketed his phone, the alcohol sloshing through his brain, and the thought of his boring co-workers had already made the decision for him. He stretched his legs out, feet first, and shuffled into the hole. Flying petals bunched around his arms as he blocked the way. He gasped as the top of his head hit a knot of wood. That would swell up for sure. In fact, he could feel something like blood was oozing through his hair. Why was he doing this? But before he could give up and pull himself out, his feet lost their footing and he slipped backwards. His hands grasped at dry leaves in a wild panic for a grip, but then his feet landed on flat ground again. Now he stood up straight, head level with the ground, petals whirling around his face. So it was a deep hole then, but not that deep. He patted his hands across the walls, feeling only dry earth a hand's width away. Interesting. Actually, no, it wasn't interesting at all, but pretty boring. A boring, empty hole. Grasping at the edges of the hole, Yushi heaved his way out and rolled across the ground. Landing next to his hanami tarp, he stared up at the pink canopy again. Well, that had been pointless. He tilted his head and stared sidelong at his last can of beer. He frowned and sat up. His hands crunched through the brown leaves. Cars hummed by on the nearby road. The world seemed sharper somehow, as if he was sober. Now he thought about it, Yes, that warm fuzziness that came after downing several beers had gone. Well, he hadn't been that drunk, had he? And falling into a hole would wake him up, right? He scratched his head, then rubbed his fingers through his hair. That bump, where had it gone? There was no blood either. Had he imagined that? He shivered, his once dulled senses now picking up the crisp, cold air. He stuffed the top and unfinished beer and snacks into his bag and headed home. He took one last glance over his shoulder as he left the park. Cherry blossom petals still tumbled through the still air into that hole. The next morning, Yushi awoke earlier than he normally did on the weekend, probably due to the lack of a hangover. Eri lay curled up in her futon, still deep in sleep. He tiptoed out of the bedroom and ran himself a steaming hot shower. He ran his hands through his slick hair over and over, finding no mark. Staring at his reflection as he brushed his teeth, Yushi reached out for his contact lenses, then stopped. He spat out his toothpaste and then stared at his reflection again. A clear, sharp reflection, every strand of damp hair clearly visible. Had he forgotten to take out his lenses last night? No, he clearly remembered taking them out. Then why could he see so well? Normally, looking at his morning reflection was like looking through a light mist. He gripped the edge of the sink for support. His sudden sobriety, no bump on his head, no need for contact lenses. They had all gone, healed. And it had all happened after climbing out of that tree. He sat at the low table, drinking green tea and eating his usual breakfast of rice and miso soup, staring through the window. He could just about see the park from here, the tops of the trees peeking over the mass of grey rooftops. Then Eri walked in, wincing in the morning sunlight. "Morning, Eri," said Yushi, pointing to the rice cooker with his chopsticks. "There's more in the pot if you want." "You're up early," said Eri, slumping into her favourite cushion and reaching for her phone. "Oh, I was just thinking." "On a weekend?" Eri raised an eyebrow. Yushi smirked. It was strange, being able to see everything so clearly right down to the tiny, fuzzy balls of lint on her pyjamas. He drummed his fingers on the side of his mug. "How's the leg?" he asked. "Still bad," said Eri, massaging her knee. "No dancing lesson for me today. Again? I'm thinking of going to the doctor, though. I think I can walk that far." Yushi stared at her knee. "Are you sure you're okay?" said Eri, a small grin playing at the side of her lips. Yushi drew himself up. "Great, actually," he said, standing up and heading to the kitchen to make Eri some breakfast. "In fact, if you do want to head to the doctor, I was thinking we'd stop by the park on the way." Eri put on a brave face as she hobbled her way down the hill. Yushi offered his shoulder to lean on, but she refused. "You'll do yourself more damage," Yushi warned. "Well, that will make the doctor pay more attention then," she said through gritted teeth, "instead of turning me away with some more weak painkillers." They rounded the corner next to the park. Yushi spotted that tree peeking through the crowd of other trees, swaying pink and white in the breeze. It was now or never. "Let's take a detour through here," said Yushi, crossing the road and stepping onto the dirt path that wound its way into the park. "You only get cherry blossom like this once a year." Eri frowned at him. "I don't have time for that," she said. "Or the, ability. But it's so pretty." "As pretty as my doctor bill will be when my leg drops off," Eri snapped. "I knew it. Something's come over you today. I think you need the doctor more than I do." Yushi dug his hands into his pockets and looked the quiet road up and down. "Okay, look," he said, shrugging. "You got me. There is something on my mind, yes, and I really need to show it to you, right now, and it might help with your leg. No doctor needed, no bill. Eri took a step back from him, wincing as she put weight on her bad leg. What are you talking about? Yushi grabbed her hand and wrapped her arm over his shoulder. Follow me, he said, leading Eri into the park. Yushi squatted next to the hole in the tree. The cherry blossom rolled over the dead leaves and tumbled into the darkness. Not quite as impressive as what he'd seen last night, but Eri didn't look impressed either. You dragged me here to look at a hole. Her face was blank, too confused to be angry. Why? Yushi patted the tree trunk and stood up. Look, this is going to sound a bit weird, but this tree can heal you. More blank staring. Yushi felt a heat rising in his face despite the cold morning. Ha! Eri gave a single sharp laugh, then covered her mouth. You're serious, aren't you? Hey, I don't get it either. Yushi held up his hands. But I was here last night, having Hanami, then I fell into this hole, but then I climbed out and suddenly I wasn't drunk, didn't have a bump on the back of my head, and I don't need contact lenses anymore. Yushi took a breath. It was like he'd been uncorked, everything he'd been bottling up since last night tumbling out. You're not wearing contacts? Eri eyed him carefully. Yushi shook his head. And you know me, I'm as blind as a bat without them. Now I can see the grain on this tree. And you want me to, what, climb into that dirty hole, because you think it'll fix my leg? Eri looked torn between laughing and screaming for help. Yushi looked up at the pink canopy. Okay, fine. Watch this. And he headbutted the tree. Eri gave a yelp as stars popped in Yushi's eyes, mingled with pink petals fluttering down. Pain spiked in his forehead, prickling through his skull. Yushi, you idiot! Eri's hands wrapped around his arm. What did you do that for? Is there a mark on my head? What? Yes, a big one! Good. World still swaying, Yushi lowered himself into the hole once more until he stared up at Eri from the level of the ground. Immediately, he felt the difference. The pain in his head dulled, the pressure on his brow fizzling away. Eri's eyes bulged, and her mouth hung open. Well? He said, scrambling out of the hole and brushing himself down. Eri ran a thumb over his smooth forehead. It's gone, she whispered. I saw it disappear, like it was water evaporating. You see what I mean? Yushi grinned. I don't know how or why, but this tree... Whoa, slow down! Eri pushed her way past Yushi, wincing as she lowered her legs into the hole, as if she were sitting on the edge of a water chute at a swimming pool. Careful, it's deeper than you think, said Yushi, holding her hands as she lowered herself into the hole. What's with the cherry blossom? She said, blinking away the petals that fluttered into her eyes. No idea, they were doing that last night as well. How's the leg? Eri's head bobbed on the spot. Yushi looked around again. Only a man walking his dog in the distance. If anyone saw them now, he wouldn't know how to begin explaining what was happening. I think it's... Oh, wait, pull me up. Yushi pulled on Eri's outstretched arms and gathered her out of the hole. She took a step back from him to brush off the mud and leaves clinging to her coat. You're not leaning on one leg anymore, said Yushi, looking her up and down. It was his turn to wince as Eri leaned on her bad leg even more, then hopped on the spot. It's healed, she breathed, eyes wide. It feels better than before. Before I twisted it, but how? Yushi shrugged again. It's like it resets you. I'd had a fair bit to drink, but then I was suddenly sober. This is incredible, said Eri. This is... Seriously, what do we do next? I don't know. It was a strange feeling, being excited and terrified all at once. Like, do we tell somebody? Of course! Eri looked like she wasn't sure which direction to run first. This could be massive, Yushi. It could cure anything, even cancer. Yushi's head spun. Cure cancer? It was the kind of thing he'd read about as being a great achievement of mankind, like world peace. Never would he have dreamed he'd be part of something so big. Those emails he'd sent to clients yesterday with policy updates seemed a million miles away. Now, let's not get carried away, he said, failing to suppress a smile. We've just healed a few cuts and bumps, that's all. Shh! Act casual, someone's coming. Eri grabbed Yushi by the lapels of his jacket and pulled him towards the tree. They leaned against it, hiding the hole with their legs as the man with the dog walked past. Morning, he said cheerfully with a wave. Hey, said Yushi, his voice unusually high. They waited until the man had rounded the corner of the fountain before they slumped to the ground. We could make a business out of this, Yushi, Eri whispered. People will be lining up from around the world to use the healing tree. The healing tree? Yushi shook his head. He was beginning to think being boring wasn't such a bad thing after all. We can't. Why not? Eri frowned, peeking over her shoulder and into the hole. You discovered it. You deserve to get the credit from it. It's not that. Yushi stood up. It's a public park. The city owns it. Eri's face fell. Oh yeah. She picked up a fistful of leaves and threw them into the air. We should make sure you still get credit, though. Where do we start, though? Said Yushi. Do we go to the city office? A doctor? A doctor first, said Eri, clambering to her feet. Nobody will listen if we march into City Hall declaring we found a healing tree. But a doctor will? Eri grinned. I know just the guy. This concludes the sample of Blood of the Cherry Blossom, a short story by PJ Leonard. If you have enjoyed this story, it will be available for full download as an ebook file on March 15th, 2017. If you are a supporter on my Patreon, then you will be able to download this book absolutely free. If you would like to support me on Patreon, the link is in the description below. Blood of the Cherry Blossom will be available for download March 15th, 2017. Thanks for listening.